November 22nd, 1963. Dallas, Texas. The time is 12:29 p.m., Central Standard Time. The sun, having broken through the morning's overcast sky, is now brilliant and warm, casting sharp, unforgiving shadows across the city streets. A cool breeze offers a slight reprieve from the surprising midday warmth, a gentle whisper against the rising noise of the crowd. We are in Dealey Plaza, a landscaped, three-sided patch of green on the western edge of downtown, a place of concrete overpasses and grassy knolls that is about to become the most infamous parcel of land in modern American history. The air is thick with anticipation, a palpable energy humming from the thousands who have lined the streets. They are here for a glimpse of royalty, American royalty. They are here to see the president, the presidential motorcade, a gleaming procession of automobiles, police motorcycles, and press cars, moves with a stately, almost dreamlike slowness. It has just completed its journey through the cheering canyons of Main Street, where the reception was unexpectedly, overwhelmingly positive. Now it makes a slow, deliberate 120-degree turn from Main onto Houston Street, passing the stern red brick facade of the Dallas County Criminal Courts building. At the head of this procession is the presidential limousine, a specially built 1961 Lincoln Continental convertible, codenamed SS-100X by the Secret Service. It is a vessel of power and modernity, its dark blue paint polished to a mirror sheen, reflecting the bright Texas sky. The bubble top, which could have offered a layer of protection, has been removed at the president's request. He wanted to be seen. He wanted to connect with the people. In the front seat, Secret Service agent Bill Greer is at the wheel, with Roy Kellerman, the agent in charge of the detail, beside him. In the jump seats just behind them sit the governor of Texas, John Connally, and his wife, Nellie. And in the rear seat, elevated for the crowd to see, are the President of the United States, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and the First Lady, Jacqueline Kennedy. She is a vision in a pink Chanel-style suit and matching pillbox hat, a splash of vibrant color in a world that is about to turn monochrome. This moment, this single, fleeting moment, is the absolute zenith of what they called Camelot. The president is young, charismatic, handsome. He is the embodiment of a new generation of American leadership. He waves to the crowd, his famous smile effortless and bright. He appears relaxed, soaking in the adulation. Just moments before, Nellie Connally had turned to him, a wide, genuine smile on her face, and said the words that would become an epitaph for the day. "Mr. President," she said, "you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." The president, still smiling, had replied with his final words to be heard by those in the car. "No, you certainly can't." It is a moment of pure political triumph, a validation of this risky trip into the heart of a state known for its conservative opposition. The danger, the political animosity that had been a major concern for his staff, seems to have melted away under the warm Texas sun. The crowds are not just large, they are ecstatic. For these few minutes, Dallas is not the city of hate some had feared. It is a city embracing its president. As the limousine completes its turn onto Houston, it heads toward the triple underpass that will take it to the Dallas Trade Mart, where the president is scheduled to deliver a luncheon speech. The route requires one final sharp turn to the left, onto Elm Street. It is a small, seemingly insignificant maneuver, a simple change of direction, but it is a turn toward destiny. It is a turn into the crosshairs, high above the street, on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. A man is waiting. He has been waiting for this exact moment. He has built himself a crude nest of cardboard boxes, a sniper's perch that offers a clear, descending line of sight onto the street below. He is a ghost in the narrative of the day, an unseen, unknown variable in a carefully choreographed public event. Down below, the world is a symphony of celebration. The roar of the crowd, the rumble of the engines, the cheerful waves. Up above, there is only silence, the cold, metallic weight of a rifle, and the steady, patient breathing of an assassin. The Lincoln Continental begins the slow, sweeping turn onto Elm Street, its speed dropping to a mere 11 miles per hour. The president is still waving, his right arm raised, his gaze turning toward the crowds lining the north side of the street. He is a perfect target, exposed, vulnerable. The entire scene is being captured on film by a local dressmaker named Abraham Zapruder, who stands on a concrete pedestal, his home movie camera recording what he believes will be a cherished memory of a historic day. He, like everyone else in Dealey Plaza, is completely unaware that he is about to film a national nightmare. The world holds its breath, but it does not know it. The future of the nation, the course of the 20th century, balances on these next few seconds. The final turn is complete. The limousine is now on Elm Street, moving slowly away from the book depository. The clock ticks past 12:30 p.m. The cheerful noise of the crowd is about to be shattered by a sound that will echo through history. A sharp cracking report, like a backfire or a firecracker. A sound that, at first, no one can quite place, a sound that signals the end of everything. This is the story of that final hour, of the moments that led to the precipice, and the chaos that followed the fall. It is a story of decisions and indecisions, of fate and circumstance, of a nation's hero and his lonely, alienated killer, all converging on a single tragic point on a sunny street in Dallas. To understand the explosion of violence that erupted on Elm Street, one must first understand the volatile atmosphere into which President Kennedy was driving. The trip to Texas in November of 1963 was not a victory lap, it was a calculated political gamble, a fence-mending mission into what was for the Kennedy administration hostile territory. Texas was a state fractured by deep, bitter divisions within the Democratic Party. The liberal wing, led by Senator Ralph Yarborough, was at open war with the conservative faction, led by Governor John Connally and Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson. The feud was personal, it was public, and it threatened to tear the state party apart, potentially costing Kennedy Texas in the upcoming 1964 election. The entire purpose of the two-day, five-city tour was to project an image of unity, to raise campaign funds, and to rally support for the president's agenda. But beneath the surface of political maneuvering lay a much darker and more dangerous current. Dallas, in particular, had earned a chilling reputation. It was known by some as the City of Hate. This was not mere political rhetoric. It was a label born of a series of disturbing incidents that painted a picture of a city seething with a virulent far-right extremism. The city was a major hub for groups like the John Birch Society, which peddled conspiracy theories about communist infiltration at the highest levels of the U.S. government. General Edwin Walker, a hero of the far right, who had been forced to resign from the army by the Kennedy administration for indoctrinating his troops with extremist literature, had made Dallas his home and his base of operations. The political climate was toxic. Just a month before Kennedy's visit, on United Nations Day, Adlai Stevenson, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, had been verbally and physically assaulted in Dallas. He was heckled, spat upon, and hit on the head with a protest sign. The incident was a national embarrassment, and it sent shockwaves through the White House. Stevenson himself warned Kennedy's staff about the trip, telling aide Arthur Mish Schlesinger, Jr., "There was a sensational and passionate and ignorant arrogance abroad in Dallas." He urged the president to reconsider. The day of the assassination, the Dallas Morning News published a full-page black-bordered advertisement from the American Fact-Finding Committee. It was a thinly veiled attack on the president, accusing him of being soft on communism and betraying the Constitution. The night before, handbills had been plastered across the city, featuring a mugshot-style photo of Kennedy, with the headline, "Wanted for Treason." The city was a powder keg of resentment, paranoia, and political rage. Against this backdrop, a solitary, deeply troubled figure was making his own journey toward Dealey Plaza. Lee Harvey Oswald was a man of contradictions, a phantom drifting through the ideological battlefields of the Cold War. At 24 years old, he was a collection of failed ambitions and simmering grievances. Born in New Orleans, he had a disjointed and lonely childhood, moving constantly with his mother. He joined the Marines at 17, where he was trained as a radar operator, and significantly, qualified as a sharpshooter with the M1 rifle. But he was a poor Marine, frequently court-martialed for insubordination and illegal possession of a private weapon. It was during this time that he began to study Marxism, teaching himself rudimentary Russian. In 1959, he abruptly defected to the Soviet Union, the ultimate act of rebellion against the country he felt had rejected him. He declared his intention to renounce his American citizenship, offering the Soviets secrets he claimed to have learned in the Marines. But the Soviet Union was not the workers' paradise he had envisioned. They saw him not as a valuable asset, but as an unstable and mentally unbalanced young man. He was sent to work in a radio and television factory in Minsk, where he grew increasingly disillusioned with the monotony and limitations of Soviet life. He married a young Russian woman, Marina Prusakova, and after 2.5 years of frustration, he did another about-face, petitioning the U.S. Embassy to return home. In June of 1962, the U.S. State Department, in a move that would later be scrutinized with agonizing intensity, facilitated the return of Oswald, his Russian wife, and their infant daughter to the United States. He settled for a time in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but his alienation only deepened. He was a man without a country, a Marxist who had rejected the Soviet model, now back in the heart of American capitalism, a system he despised. He drifted between menial jobs, his life a chaotic mix of political agitation and domestic turmoil. He tried to establish a one-man chapter of the pro-Castro Fair Play for Cuba Committee in New Orleans, a farcical effort that led to his arrest after a street fight with anti-Castro Cubans. He was a political chameleon, a man searching for an identity, for a cause that would give his life meaning. In the spring of 1963, his simmering rage found a target. He ordered a 6.5mm Mannlicher Carcano rifle, an Italian-made bolt-action military surplus weapon, through the mail for $19.95, using the alias A. Hidell. He also purchased a .38 Smith Wesson revolver. It was with this rifle that he allegedly made his first attempt at political assassination. On the night of April 10, 1963, a single shot was fired through the window of the home of General Edwin Walker, the same right-wing firebrand who had made Dallas his home. The bullet missed Walker's head by inches, embedding itself in the wall. The Dallas police had no suspects. It was only after the Kennedy assassination that Marina Oswald would reveal that her husband had planned and carried out the attack. He had come home that night, she said, pale and breathing heavily, admitting he had just tried to kill Walker. He saw the general as a fascist leader, a legitimate target in his one-man war. The attempt failed, but it was a dress rehearsal. It proved to Oswald that he was capable of planning and executing a political murder. By the fall of 1963, Oswald's life was in a state of near total collapse. His marriage was failing, he was estranged from Marina, and he was once again unemployed. On October 15th, through a neighbor's acquaintance, he found a job. It was a temporary position as an order filler at a warehouse in downtown Dallas. The building was the Texas School Book Depository. From its upper windows it offered a commanding, unobstructed view of Dealey Plaza and the planned presidential motorcade route. The forces were now converging. The president, seeking to heal a divided party, was heading toward a city simmering with political hatred. And a deeply alienated, violence-prone young man, a man who had already attempted one political murder, was now working in the perfect location, with the perfect vantage point, to commit another. The security preparations for the visit were extensive, but they were also compromised by the very nature of the trip. The president wanted to be accessible. This desire for public contact was a constant source of tension between the White House political staff and the Secret Service. The route through Dallas was published in the newspapers days in advance, a standard practice to allow crowds to gather, but also a glaring security risk that gave any potential attacker ample time to plan. The Secret Service had conducted a survey of the route, noting the tall buildings, including the book depository. But with limited manpower, they could not secure every window and rooftop along a 10-mile path. Their focus was on immediate threats, on the crowd itself. The possibility of a sniper, high up in a building, was considered a secondary, less likely threat. And so, as the morning of November 22nd dawned, all the pieces were in place. A president determined to meet the people, a city filled with a dangerous and unpredictable political energy, and a lone, forgotten man with a mail-order rifle, waiting for his chance to step out of the shadows and onto the world stage in the most horrific way imaginable. The final hours before the tragedy unfolded with a deceptive sense of normalcy, a series of routine actions and mundane choices that in hindsight appear laden with a terrible, tragic weight. For the Kennedys, the day began in Fort Worth, at the Hotel Texas. The mood was buoyant. The previous day's events in San Antonio and Houston had been a resounding success. The president was in good spirits, energized by the warm receptions. He began his day with a speech in a parking lot outside the hotel, speaking to a rain-soaked but enthusiastic crowd of thousands. He was witty and charming, joking about the First Lady's late appearance. "Mrs. Kennedy is organizing herself," he quipped. "It takes her a little longer, but of course she looks better than we do when she does it." When Jacqueline finally appeared, radiant in her pink suit, the crowd roared its approval. The suit had been a specific choice, one the president had encouraged. "There are going to be all these rich Republican women at that lunch, wearing mink coats and diamond bracelets," he had told her. "And you've got to be as simple as you can." The pink suit was perfect. It was a symbol of her elegance, her grace, a visual representation of the Camelot mystique. From the parking lot they moved inside to a breakfast hosted by the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce. Here, Kennedy delivered what would be his last formal speech. His tone was serious, focused on national security and defense, a message tailored for the Texas audience. He spoke of the nation's strength and its global responsibilities. "We are still the keystone in the Arch of Freedom," he declared. "We will not be weary in well-doing." He ended his remarks on a note of confidence and optimism, looking ahead to the challenges of the future. After the breakfast, there was a brief, unscheduled moment that captured the essence of the Kennedy charisma. As they were leaving the hotel, the president noticed a crowd of people gathered across the street, held back by police lines. On an impulse, he crossed the street to shake hands, plunging into the crowd. The Secret Service agents tensed, their training screaming at them that this was a breach of protocol, a dangerous and unpredictable move. But this was Kennedy. He thrived on this connection, this physical contact with the public. For a few moments, he was swallowed by the adoring crowd, a sea of hands reaching out to touch him. It was a moment of pure political theater, and it was utterly genuine. Then it was on to Carswell Air Force Base for the short, 13-minute flight to Dallas. Aboard Air Force One, the atmosphere was relaxed. The president read the morning papers, including the Dallas Morning News with its black-bordered accusatory advertisement. He showed it to Jacqueline, remarking with a grim sense of irony, "We're heading into nut country today." But the concern was fleeting, overshadowed by the success of the trip so far. As they prepared for landing, the final preparations for the Dallas motorcade were underway. At Dallas Love Field, a massive, welcoming crowd had gathered. The plan was for the President and First Lady to greet the public there before entering the limousine for the trip to the Trade Mart. The weather, which had been drizzly and gray, was clearing. The sun was beginning to break through the clouds. This change in weather prompted a critical decision. The clear plastic bubble top for the limousine was available, but Secret Service agent Roy Kellerman, seeing the clearing skies and knowing the President's preference for an open car, made the call to leave it off. It was a routine decision, one made on countless other occasions. But on this day, it would prove to be a fatal one. At the same time, miles away, another man's morning was unfolding along a very different, and much darker, trajectory. Lee Harvey Oswald awoke in the suburban Irving home of Michael and Ruth Payne, where his estranged wife Marina and their 2 children were living. The night before, he had made a rare unannounced visit, a seeming attempt at reconciliation with Marina. It had not gone well. That morning he rose before anyone else. He dressed for work, but before he left, he went to the garage. There he retrieved the Mannlicher Carcano rifle, which he had stored wrapped in a blanket. He then went back into the small bedroom he used on his weekend visits. He took off his wedding ring, leaving it in a cup on Marina's bedside table. He also left nearly all of his money, about $170, on the dresser. These were the actions of a man who did not expect to come home. His co-worker, Buell Wesley Frazier, who also lived in Irving, had agreed to give him a ride to work. When Oswald came out of the house, he was carrying a long, bulky package wrapped in brown paper. Frazier asked him what it was. "Curtain rods," Oswald replied curtly. He claimed he was bringing them to his small rented room in Dallas. Frazier thought nothing of it. The package fit on the back seat of his car, and the 2 men made the 45-minute drive to the Texas School Book Depository in near silence. Oswald, as usual, was withdrawn and uncommunicative. They arrived at the depository around 8 a.m. Oswald got out of the car first, grabbing the long package. "I'll see you this afternoon," Frazier called after him. Oswald just walked away, carrying his curtain rods into the building. He was seen by a few co-workers inside, but no one paid him much attention. He was a loner, a man who kept to himself. He took the package and ascended to the 6th floor, the top floor of the warehouse. This floor was a chaotic maze of cardboard boxes filled with textbooks, a dusty, dimly lit space with windows overlooking Dealey Plaza. Sometime that morning, he found a spot in the southeast corner. He moved boxes to create a small, 3-sided enclosure, a sniper's nest. He had a perfect view of the intersection of Houston and Elm. He sat down to wait. The paths were now set on an unalterable collision course. In one timeline, a president was flying through the brightening Texas sky, preparing to be greeted by adoring crowds, a symbol of national hope and vitality. In the other, a deeply disturbed young man was sitting in a dusty warehouse, surrounded by boxes of books, cradling a rifle, his mind filled with a toxic brew of ideology, grievance, and a desperate desire for infamy. As the presidential plane touched down at Love Field at 11:40 a.m., the 2 timelines began to merge. The reception was electric. The Kennedys, along with Governor Connolly and his wife, disembarked to a roar of applause. The President and First Lady worked the fence line, shaking hands, their progress slow as they were mobbed by well-wishers. The mood was jubilant, washing away any lingering fears about the city's hostile political climate. At approximately 12:10 p.m., the motorcade finally departed from Love Field, beginning its 10-mile journey to the Trade Mart. The route was designed to give the maximum number of people a chance to see the president. It wound through residential neighborhoods before heading into the heart of downtown. The crowds were immense, far larger than anyone had anticipated. People stood 10 and 15 deep along the sidewalks, cheering, waving flags, holding up children. The pace was slow, the limousine often coming to a near stop, as the president ordered the car to slow down or halt, so he could shake a hand or acknowledge a sign. For the Secret Service agents jogging alongside the car or riding in the follow-up vehicle, it was a nerve-wracking ordeal. The open car, the slow speed, the dense crowds, it was a security nightmare. But the president was pleased. This was exactly what he had wanted. The political gamble was paying off. As the motorcade entered downtown and turned onto Main Street, the crowds became a solid wall of humanity, their cheers echoing off the tall buildings. It was here that Nellie Connolly made her now famous remark to the president about Dallas's love for him. It was a moment of shared triumph, a brief, happy interlude before the final, fateful turn. The motorcade reached the west end of Main Street and made the turn onto Houston. Dealey Plaza lay directly ahead. The time was 12:29 p.m. The crowd here was thinner but still enthusiastic. Up on the 6th floor of the book depository, the wait was almost over. The target was approaching. The world, for one last moment, was bright, loud, and full of life. The Lincoln Continental, the symbol of American power and optimism, glided toward the sharp left turn onto Elm Street, directly below the sniper's window. The convergence was complete. Time had run out. The moment is frozen in time, etched into the national consciousness by a silent 8mm home movie. It is a film that runs for only 26.6 seconds, yet it contains an eternity of horror. Abraham Zapruder, perched on his concrete pedestal, raises his Bell Howell camera to his eye as the presidential limousine makes its slow, graceful turn onto Elm Street. Through his lens he captures the scene, the president and first lady waving, the Connollys in front of them, the vibrant green of the grassy knoll, the cheerful, unsuspecting faces in the crowd. For a few seconds, it is a perfect, sun-drenched tableau of American life. The clock on the Hertz sign atop the book depository reads 12:30 p.m. The limousine is moving at approximately 11.2 miles per hour. Zapruder's film shows President Kennedy waving to the crowd on his right. He brings his hand down and is momentarily obscured by a street sign. When he re-emerges, something is wrong. At Zapruder frame 225, the president's hands suddenly fly up to his throat in a reflexive, clutching motion. His elbows jut out to his sides. His face contorts with a look of pained confusion. He has been hit. The first shot has been fired. The bullet, a 6.5mm copper-jacketed round, entered the back of his neck, just above the shoulder blade. It tore through his throat, severing his trachea and bruising his right lung, before exiting just below his Adam's apple. This is the shot that would later be dubbed the single bullet, or magic bullet, by the Warren Commission. The same projectile that, after exiting the president's neck, is believed to have continued on to strike Governor Connolly. In the car, the sound of the shot was sharp and explosive, but its source was maddeningly unclear. Most witnesses, including many in law enforcement, initially thought it was a motorcycle backfire or a firecracker. Governor Connolly, an experienced hunter, knew instantly it was a rifle shot. He began to turn to his right, to look back at the president, when he felt what he described as a massive violent impact in his back. "My God!" he cried out. "They are going to kill us all." The second bullet had struck him just below his right armpit, shattering his fifth rib, exiting his chest, piercing his right wrist, and finally embedding itself in his left thigh. The force of the impact collapsed his right lung and sent him lurching forward, and to his left, into his wife Nellie's lap. For a critical 1 to 2 seconds, there is a stunned, surreal silence. The motorcade continues to move forward at the same slow pace. Secret Service agent Bill Greer, the driver, later testified that he heard the noise but hesitated, glancing back in the rearview mirror. He saw the president slump forward, but did not immediately realize he was shot. He did not accelerate. Agent Roy Kellerman in the passenger seat shouted, "Let's get out of here. We are hit." But the car did not speed up. In the follow-up car just feet behind the limousine, the Secret Service agents were reacting. Agent Clint Hill, assigned to protect the First Lady, heard the first shot and saw the president clutch his throat. He leaped from the running board of the follow-up car and began sprinting toward the presidential limousine, a desperate, heroic dash to do the impossible. The world was now moving in slow motion for those in the epicenter of the attack. Jacqueline Kennedy turned to her husband. She saw the look of bewilderment and pain on his face. "What have they done?" she seems to ask, her expression a mask of confusion and concern. She puts her arm around him, trying to understand, trying to help. Up on the 6th floor of the book depository, the sniper was working the bolt action of his Mannlicher Carcano rifle, ejecting the spent cartridge, chambering a new round, reacquiring his target through the cheap 4X telescopic sight. The entire cycle took a minimum of 2.3 seconds. The limousine was still a clear, slow-moving target, now approximately 265 feet from his window. Then came the third shot. This is the moment that is seared into history, the moment that Zapruder's film captured with sickening graphic clarity. At Zapruder frame 313, the president's head explodes. The bullet strikes him on the upper right side of his head, creating a massive, fatal wound. The impact is brutal and shocking. It drives his body violently backward and to the left into the seat of the limousine. A spray of blood, brain matter and bone fragments erupts into the air, creating a ghastly pink halo around his head. The effect is instantaneous and catastrophic. The right side of his skull is blown out. He is, for all intents and purposes, gone in that instant. The sound of this shot was entirely different from the first two. It was louder, more concussive, a sickening crack that left no doubt as to what had happened. Chaos erupted. The crowd, which had been confused by the first shots, now screamed in unison, a wave of collective terror and grief. People threw themselves to the ground, grabbing their children, seeking cover behind anything they could find. The grassy knoll became a scene of pure pandemonium, as people ran in every direction, many believing the shots had come from the stockade fence at the top of the hill. In the presidential limousine, a scene of unimaginable horror was unfolding. Jacqueline Kennedy, in a state of profound shock, reacted with a primal instinctual movement. She cried out, a sound that Clint Hill described as a wail of anguish. She then climbed out of her seat and onto the trunk of the moving car. For years this moment was misinterpreted as an attempt to escape, but her own testimony and the observations of Clint Hill revealed the heartbreaking truth. She was reaching for a piece of her husband's skull that had been blown onto the back of the car. It was a desperate, unthinking act of a wife trying to reclaim a piece of her husband, to somehow put him back together. At that moment, Clint Hill finally reached the limousine. He pushed the First Lady back into her seat, shielding her with his own body, and then lay across the trunk as the car finally, belatedly, began to accelerate. He pounded on the trunk with his fist, screaming at the driver. He looked down into the back seat and saw a scene of carnage. The president's body was slumped over toward his wife, his head a bloody, unrecognizable ruin. Governor Connolly was lying in his wife's lap, his chest covered in blood. The floor of the car was awash with it. Hill could see into the president's head wound. He knew it was over. He turned and gave a grim thumbs down to the agents in the follow-up car. The 6 seconds that had begun with a triumphant wave had ended in a blood-soaked nightmare. The motorcade, now a frantic race against death, broke from the parade formation, sirens finally wailing, and sped toward Parkland Memorial Hospital, 4 miles away. In Dealey Plaza, the immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. Police officers, their guns drawn, ran up the grassy knoll, acting on the instincts of the majority of witnesses who believed the shots came from the front. Motorcycle officer Marion Baker, however, had been near the front of the motorcade, and had seen pigeons fly from the roof of the book depository. He immediately abandoned his motorcycle, ran into the building, with building manager Roy Truly, began to make his way to the roof. On the second-floor landing, they encountered a man, calm and unhurried, in the lunchroom. It was Lee Harvey Oswald. Truly identified him as an employee, and Baker, seeing nothing suspicious, let him go. Oswald had descended from his sniper's nest, hidden the rifle behind a stack of boxes, and was now walking out the front door of the building, melting into the chaos he had created. 6 seconds. In the time it takes to draw a breath, the world had been irrevocably altered. A president was dying, a nation's innocence was shattered, and a lone gunman was walking away, leaving behind a crime that would spawn 1,000 questions, a universe of doubt, and a wound on the American soul that has never truly healed. The journey from Dealey Plaza to Parkland Memorial Hospital was a 4-mile descent into hell. Inside the presidential limousine, the world had shrunk to a bubble of blood, grief, and desperation. Agent Clint Hill, sprawled across the trunk, clung to the handholds, his body a human shield over the president and first lady. He looked down at the president, slumped in his wife's lap. The wound was horrific, beyond comprehension. A gaping hole where the right side of his head had been. Hill knew, with the cold certainty of a man trained to face death, that it was fatal, but duty compelled action. Hope, however faint, had to be maintained. Jacqueline Kennedy cradled her husband's shattered head, her pink suit and white gloves now stained a grotesque, deep crimson. She murmured to him, "Jack, Jack, can you hear me? I love you." Her voice was a low, desperate plea in the wail of the sirens. Governor Connolly, gravely wounded himself, had slumped into his wife Nellie's lap. He was conscious but struggling to breathe, his chest cavity filling with blood from his collapsed lung. Nellie held him, trying to comfort him, while simultaneously witnessing the unspeakable horror in the seat behind her. In the front, Agent Roy Kellerman was on the radio, his voice strained but professional, relaying the stark, unbelievable news. "Lancer is hit," he said, using the president's code name. "We are going to the hospital, Parkland Hospital. Have them stand by." The driver, Bill Greer, now pushed the powerful Lincoln to its limits, weaving through the Dallas traffic at speeds approaching 80 miles per hour, the police escort clearing a path ahead. The trip took less than 5 minutes, but for those inside the car, it was an agonizing eternity suspended between a moment of life and the certainty of death. As the limousine raced on, the assassin was making his own escape. Lee Harvey Oswald had walked calmly out of the front entrance of the Texas School Book Depository, just minutes after the shooting. In the ensuing chaos, with police and witnesses focused on the grassy knoll, his exit went largely unnoticed. He walked east on Elm Street for 7 blocks, a solitary figure moving against the tide of panic. He boarded a city bus, but it quickly became stuck in the gridlock traffic caused by the assassination. Impatient, he got off the bus and hailed a taxi. He directed the driver to take him to his small rooming house in the Oak Cliff section of Dallas, several miles away. He arrived at the rooming house at approximately 1 p.m. The housekeeper, Earlene Roberts, was surprised to see him. He said nothing, went straight to his room and emerged less than a minute later, now wearing a jacket and zipping it up. She noticed he was carrying a pistol. He left without a word, walking out into the quiet residential neighborhood. His movements were now becoming frantic, his calculated calm beginning to fray. Back at Parkland, the presidential limousine screeched to a halt at the emergency room entrance at 12:38 p.m. The scene that greeted the hospital staff was one of controlled chaos. They had received the radio call that the president was on his way, but nothing could have prepared them for the reality. As the doors of the limousine were opened, the full horror was revealed. Doctors and nurses rushed forward with a gurney. Clint Hill and Kellerman helped lift the president's limp body from the car. Governor Connolly was lifted onto a second gurney. Jacqueline Kennedy, refusing to let go of her husband, climbed out of the car with him, her face a blank mask of shock, her eyes vacant. She followed the gurney as it was wheeled rapidly through the doors into Trauma Room 1. The doctors who converged in that small, sterile room were some of the best in Dallas, but they were confronted with a wound that no amount of medical skill could repair. Dr. Charles Crenshaw, Dr. Malcolm Perry, and Dr. Kemp Clark, the head of neurosurgery, were among the first to attend to the president. The head wound was massive, and clearly non-survivable. A significant portion of the right side of his brain was gone. There was also the wound in his throat, bubbling with air and blood. In the urgent, desperate moments of trying to save a life, the doctors focused on what they could do. They performed a tracheotomy, cutting through the bullet wound in his neck to insert a breathing tube. They started intravenous lines and began a blood transfusion. They attached chest tubes to relieve pressure. These were the standard reflexive actions of emergency medicine, a heroic but ultimately futile effort to reverse the irreversible. Jacqueline Kennedy stood just outside the trauma room, refusing to leave. She was eventually persuaded to sit in a small room nearby, where she was joined by White House aides Kenny O'Donnell and Dave Powers. Her composure was unnerving. She would not allow anyone to clean the blood from her face or her suit. "Let them see what they've done," she repeated. While the doctors at Parkland fought a losing battle, Oswald's flight was taking a violent turn. At approximately 1:15 p.m., about 9/10 of a mile from his rooming house, he was spotted by Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit. The description of the assassination suspect, a white male, slender in his early 30s, had just gone out over the police radio. Tippit, cruising in his patrol car, saw a man who fit that description walking down the street. He pulled over and called to Oswald. What happened next was witnessed by several people in the quiet residential neighborhood. Oswald walked over to the police car. They exchanged a few words through the passenger side window. Then, as Tippit got out of his car and began to walk around the front, Oswald suddenly pulled out his .38 revolver. He fired 4 shots in rapid succession. Officer Tippit was hit 3 times in the chest, and once in the head. He fell to the pavement, killed instantly. Oswald turned and ran, ejecting the spent cartridges from his revolver as he fled. He had just escalated his crime from political assassination to the murder of a police officer, an act that sealed his fate and ensured a massive citywide manhunt would now focus entirely on him. The race was now on 2 fronts: the desperate attempt to preserve the flickering life of the president, and the frantic search for the man who had taken it. At the Texas Theater, a few blocks from the Tippit murder scene, the manager of a shoe store, Johnny Brewer, noticed a man acting suspiciously, ducking into the entrance of his store as police cars screamed past. The man then slipped into the movie theater without paying. Brewer alerted the ticket taker, who called the police. The net was closing. Back in Trauma Room 1, the inevitable moment had arrived. The president's brain activity was non-existent. His heart, stimulated by the medical interventions, was failing. A Catholic priest, Father Oscar Huber, was summoned to administer the last rites of the church. He anointed the president, reciting the prayers for the dying. At 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, after all efforts had been exhausted, Dr. Kemp Clark pronounced President John F. Kennedy dead. The official cause of death was a massive gunshot wound to the head. The race was over. A new terrible chapter was just beginning. The news was relayed to the vice president, Lyndon Johnson, who was also at Parkland, having been separated from the chaos and placed under heavy Secret Service guard. The weight of the world was about to fall upon his shoulders. The doctors, their faces grim, left the trauma room. The First Lady was allowed to go in. She approached her husband's body. She removed her wedding ring and placed it on his finger. She kissed his foot. The brief, shining moment of Camelot had been extinguished in a small, blood-stained room in Dallas. The official declaration of death at 1 p.m. was a formality. For the doctors in Trauma Room 1, the end had been a certainty from the moment they first saw the catastrophic head wound. But for the world outside that small room, it was a thunderclap that marked the definitive end of an era. The news at first was a chaotic jumble of conflicting reports and rumors, but the grim reality began to filter out from Parkland Hospital, spreading with the terrifying speed of modern communication. White House Acting Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff, his face pale and his voice trembling with emotion, made the official announcement to the press corps crammed into a nurse's classroom at the hospital. He fought to maintain his composure as he delivered the words that would stop the world. President John F. Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time today here in Dallas, he stammered. He died of a gunshot wound in the brain. I have no other details regarding the assassination of the president. With that, the unbearable suspense was over, replaced by the crushing weight of certainty. The nation, and indeed the world, plunged into a state of collective shock and grief. The immediate aftermath at Parkland was a tense and surreal tableau. The body of the fallen president became the subject of a jurisdictional dispute. The Dallas County Medical Examiner, Dr. Earl Rose, insisted that Texas law required an autopsy to be performed in Dallas. The Secret Service and the president's aides were adamant that the body would be returned to Washington immediately. The confrontation was tense. A clash of local law and federal authority played out in the shadow of a national tragedy. Clint Hill and other agents physically blocked the doorway, refusing to allow the local officials to take custody of the body. They would not leave their president behind. Ultimately, the federal contingent prevailed. A bronze casket was brought to the hospital, and the president's body was prepared for transport. The scene was one of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. Jacqueline Kennedy refused to leave her husband's side, accompanying the casket, as it was wheeled out of the hospital and loaded into a waiting hearse. Her pink suit, a symbol of joy and elegance just an hour before, was now a horrific testament to the day's violence. She would not change out of it for the remainder of the day, a silent, powerful statement of witness. While this somber drama unfolded, the manhunt for the killer reached its climax. At approximately 1:45 p.m., a squadron of Dallas police cars converged on the Texas Theater. The lights were brought up inside, and the movie, War is Hell, was stopped. Police began to search the patrons row by row. They found Lee Harvey Oswald sitting in the back. As they approached, he reportedly said, "Well, it is all over now." He then stood up and punched one of the officers, while simultaneously drawing his revolver. In the struggle, the gun's hammer fell on the webbing of an officer's hand, preventing it from firing. Oswald was subdued, overwhelmed by a swarm of officers, and dragged out of the theater, shouting about police brutality. The man who had shattered the nation's peace was in custody. The focus now shifted to Dallas Love Field, where Air Force One waited on the tarmac, a gleaming symbol of presidential power now transformed into a flying tomb. Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, his face a mask of grim determination, had been rushed to the plane for his own safety. The decision was made that he must be sworn in as the 36th President of the United States before the plane departed for Washington. It was a constitutional necessity, a move to ensure the continuity of government, and to show the world that despite the assassination, the American system of power was stable and unbroken. The scene inside the conference room of Air Force One was cramped, hot, and thick with tension and grief. Federal Judge Sarah T. Hughes, a Kennedy appointee, was summoned to administer the oath. A Bible was found in the stateroom. At 2:38 p.m., Lyndon Baines Johnson placed his left hand on the Bible, raised his right hand and recited the presidential oath of office. Standing beside him, a witness to this sudden violent transfer of power, was Jacqueline Kennedy. Her face was stoic, her eyes hollow, the blood of her husband still staining her suit. Her presence was a deliberate choice. Johnson had wanted her there, a symbol of legitimacy and continuity, and she had agreed, believing it was her duty. The photograph of that moment, Johnson's hand raised, his face etched with the immense burden he was assuming, and the shattered First Lady beside him, would become one of the most iconic and haunting images of the 20th century. Immediately after the oath, Johnson gave a simple, direct order: "Now let's get airborne." Air Force One, now carrying a new president in the body of his predecessor, thundered down the runway and lifted off into the Texas sky, leaving behind a city that would forever be associated with the crime that had just been committed there. On the flight back to Washington, the new president began the immense task of governing. He made calls to congressional leaders and to the Kennedy family. He began to dictate his thoughts, to plan the first steps of his presidency. Meanwhile, in the rear of the plane, Jacqueline Kennedy sat with her husband's casket, refusing to leave it. She sat with her friends and aides, Kenny O'Donnell, Dave Powers, and Larry O'Brien, the men of the Irish Mafia who had been so central to the Kennedy world. They shared their grief, their disbelief, their memories of the man in the casket. The 4-hour flight was a surreal journey through a national nightmare, a voyage from one reality to another. As Air Force One flew eastward, the rest of America was coming to a standstill. In New York, the stock exchange closed early. In Washington, Congress adjourned. Across the country, schools closed, businesses shut their doors, and people gathered in stunned silence around television sets and radios. The voice of Walter Cronkite, the trusted anchor of CBS News, became the voice of the nation's grief. After struggling with unconfirmed reports for much of the afternoon, he finally received the official word. He removed his glasses, his voice thick with emotion, and announced, "From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago." It was a moment of shared national trauma, a public display of grief that unified the country in its sorrow. The images from that afternoon are seared into the collective memory. People weeping openly in the streets, strangers consoling each other, the solemn faces of world leaders expressing their shock and condolences. The assassination was not just the death of a man, it was a profound psychological blow, a violent assault on the nation's sense of self. The optimism and vigor of the Kennedy years, the feeling of a new frontier, had been extinguished in an instant. The era of Camelot was over, and a new, more uncertain and more violent age had begun. When Air Force One landed at Andrews Air Force Base outside Washington, it was met by a somber delegation led by the late president's brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. His face was a portrait of anguish as he boarded the plane and went to the rear to be with his sister-in-law and his brother's casket. The casket was lowered from the plane by a hydraulic lift and placed in a gray Navy ambulance, beginning the final journey to Bethesda Naval Hospital for the autopsy. President Johnson made his first address to the nation from the tarmac, his words heavy but resolute. "This is a sad time for all people," he said. "I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask for your help. And God's." The end of the day found a nation cloaked in darkness, not just from the setting of the sun, but from the extinguishing of a bright, vibrant light. The era of innocence was over. The questions, the doubts, and the long, painful process of mourning had just begun. The immediate aftermath of the assassination gave way to 4 days of national mourning that were unprecedented in their scope and intensity. From the moment Air Force One touched down at Andrews Air Force Base on the evening of November 22nd until the president's burial at Arlington National Cemetery on November 25th, the United States was a nation suspended in a state of shared grief. The television networks, in a move that defined the role of media in a national crisis, canceled all regular programming and commercials, providing non-stop commercial-free coverage of the unfolding events. For the first time, an entire nation was brought together by the electronic hearth of television, witnessing history and mourning as one. The autopsy of the president was conducted at Bethesda Naval Hospital through the late hours of Friday night and into the early morning of Saturday. It was a grim clinical procedure that sought to document the brutal reality of the assassination, but it was also fraught with confusion and procedural inconsistencies that would later fuel decades of conspiracy theories. The doctors, primarily military pathologists unfamiliar with forensic assassinations, worked under immense pressure with grieving family members and federal officials present. Their findings confirmed 2 shots from behind, one passing through the neck and the other causing the massive fatal head wound, but the report they produced would be criticized for its lack of precision, its missing photographs and X-rays, and its apparent contradictions with the observations of the doctors at Parkland Hospital. This confusion, born in the chaos and trauma of the moment, laid the first seeds of public doubt. Early on Saturday morning, the president's casket was taken to the East Room of the White House, where it lay in state. Jacqueline Kennedy, who had overseen every detail of the funeral arrangements, modeled them on those of Abraham Lincoln. She was determined that her husband's farewell would be imbued with the dignity and historical weight she felt it deserved. She stood vigil by the casket, a figure of remarkable, almost surreal, grace and strength. Her composure in the face of such personal devastation became a source of inspiration for a grieving nation. While a nation mourned its fallen leader, the machinery of justice was grinding forward in Dallas. Lee Harvey Oswald, the accused assassin, was subjected to intense interrogation by the Dallas police and the FBI. He denied everything. He denied shooting the president. He denied shooting Officer Tippit. He denied owning the rifle found on the 6th floor of the book depository. He was arrogant, defiant, and contradictory, a puzzle that investigators were just beginning to piece together. He demanded legal representation, but the process was slow and chaotic. He was, in his own words, just a patsy. He was a mystery, and the world was desperate for answers. The desire for a swift and public resolution to the crime led the Dallas police to a fateful decision. They would transfer Oswald from the city jail to the more secure county jail on Sunday morning, and they would allow the press to witness it. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. On the morning of Sunday, November 24th, as millions watched live on television, Lee Harvey Oswald was led through the basement of the Dallas police headquarters. As he stepped into the glare of the television lights, a man suddenly lunged forward from the crowd of reporters. The man was Jack Ruby, a local nightclub owner with ties to the Dallas underworld. In his hand was a .38 Colt Cobra revolver. He fired a single shot into Oswald's abdomen. The cameras captured the shocking, surreal moment. The lunge, the flash of the gun, Oswald's cry of pain, the scrum of bodies as police tackled Ruby to the ground. The accused assassin of the president had been murdered on live national television. The act was meant, in Ruby's own confused and grandiose mind, to spare Jacqueline Kennedy the ordeal of a trial, but its effect was the opposite. It silenced the one man who could have provided definitive answers about the assassination. It transformed a murder investigation into an enduring labyrinthine mystery. It was the ultimate act of chaos, a second shattering blow to a nation already reeling from the first. With Oswald's death, the hope for a clear and simple explanation was gone forever. The seeds of conspiracy already sown in the confusion of the event now found fertile ground in the public's imagination. How could security be so lax? Who was Jack Ruby? Was he acting alone, or was he part of a larger plot to silence Oswald? The questions multiplied, spiraling into a vortex of doubt and suspicion that would come to define the assassination's legacy. The murder of Oswald deepened the national trauma, adding a layer of darkness and ambiguity to the grief. But the rituals of mourning continued. On Sunday afternoon, the president's casket was carried on a horse-drawn caisson from the White House to the U.S. Capitol, a solemn procession down Pennsylvania Avenue. The slow, muffled beat of the drums, the clatter of the horse's hooves on the pavement, the sight of the riderless horse, Black Jack, with boots reversed in the stirrups, these became the sounds and images of a nation's farewell. Hundreds of thousands of people lined the route, standing in silent tribute. At the Capitol, the casket was placed in the rotunda to lie in state. Throughout the night and into the next day, an estimated 250,000 people filed past, a silent, somber river of humanity, waiting for hours in the cold to pay their last respects. The state funeral was held on Monday, November 25th. It was a day of global mourning. Dignitaries from over 90 countries attended, one of the largest gatherings of world leaders in history. The funeral procession from the Capitol to St. Matthew's Cathedral, and then to Arlington National Cemetery, was a spectacle of solemn pageantry. Jacqueline Kennedy, veiled in black, walked with her husband's brothers, Robert and Edward. The image of her young son, John Jr., on his 3rd birthday, stepping forward to salute his father's casket, became an indelible symbol of the tragedy's personal cost, a moment of heartbreaking innocence amidst the profound sorrow. At Arlington, after the final prayers and a 21-gun salute, Jacqueline Kennedy was handed a lit taper. She knelt and touched the flame to a pipe on the ground, igniting the eternal flame at the head of her husband's grave. It was her final, poignant tribute, a symbol that his memory and his ideals would endure. The burial marked the end of the official period of mourning, but it was only the beginning of the event's long and complex legacy. The assassination of John F. Kennedy was more than the death of a president. It was a turning point. It marked the end of a period of post-war American confidence and optimism. The decade that followed would be one of profound division and turmoil, the escalation of the war in Vietnam, a policy that Kennedy had begun, but which his successor, Lyndon Johnson, would massively expand. The explosion of the civil rights movement and the urban riots that followed, the rise of the counterculture, and the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy. The shot fired in Dealey Plaza, seemed to have unleashed the darker forces that had been simmering beneath the surface of American society. The sense of a shared national purpose, so central to the Kennedy mystique, was fractured. The government, once seen as a force for good, became an object of suspicion. The Warren Commission, established by President Johnson to investigate the assassination, would conclude in 1964 that Lee Harvey Oswald had acted alone. But its report, intended to provide closure and reassurance, was met with widespread skepticism. The unanswered questions, the inconsistencies in the evidence, and the sheer implausibility of the official narrative for many, gave rise to a cottage industry of conspiracy theories that persists to this day. The assassination became a permanent wound, a scar on the American psyche, a moment when the nation's narrative of progress and exceptionalism was violently interrupted. The grief for the man became intertwined with a deeper, more lasting grief for a lost sense of possibility, a lost innocence that could never be reclaimed. More than half a century has passed since that brilliant, terrible afternoon in Dallas. The world has changed in ways that would have been unimaginable to the people who lined the motorcade route on November 22, 1963. Yet the event itself remains stubbornly present, a fixed point in our collective memory, a historical wound that refuses to heal. The assassination of John F.T. Kennedy is not merely a subject of historical inquiry. It is a modern American myth, a story told and retold, debated and deconstructed, a dark mirror reflecting our deepest anxieties about power, truth, and the nature of our own society. Why does this single event continue to exert such a powerful hold on our imagination? The answer lies not just in the brutal public nature of the murder, but in what was lost with it. Kennedy, for all his political and personal complexities, represented something powerful to the nation and to the world. He was the embodiment of youth, vigor, and forward-looking optimism. His presidency, though brief, seemed to promise a new era of American leadership, one defined by intelligence, grace, and a commitment to public service. His famous inaugural address, with its call to ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country, had galvanized a generation. His handling of the Cuban Missile Crisis seemed to prove his mettle on the world stage, steering the world back from the brink of nuclear annihilation. His championing of the space race and the Apollo program captured the nation's imagination, pointing toward a future of limitless possibility. The assassination did not just kill a man, it killed a narrative. It violently aborted the story of Camelot, the romanticized vision of a White House filled with youth, beauty, and intellectual brilliance. In its place, it left a vacuum, a void that was quickly filled with suspicion, cynicism, and a profound sense of disillusionment. The official explanation, as presented by the Warren Commission in September of 1964, was intended to fill that void with certainty. After a 10-month investigation, the commission, led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald, acting alone, had fired 3 shots from the Texas School Book Depository, killing the president and wounding Governor Connally. It found that Jack Ruby, also acting alone, had murdered Oswald. There was, the report stated, no evidence of a conspiracy, domestic or foreign. The report was a monumental effort, a 26-volume testament to the government's desire for a definitive answer. But for a large and growing segment of the American public, the answer was deeply unsatisfying. The theory of the lone nut seemed an inadequate explanation for such a monumental crime. How could a figure as insignificant as Oswald bring down a man as powerful as Kennedy? The sheer asymmetry of it felt wrong, unbalanced. The Commission's own report contained troubling ambiguities. The single bullet theory, which was necessary to explain all the wounds to Kennedy and Connally with just 3 shots, seemed to many to be a physical impossibility, requiring a bullet to perform a series of improbable twists and turns. The conflicting testimony of witnesses, many of whom believed shots came from the grassy knoll, was largely dismissed. The procedural flaws in the autopsy, the mysterious chain of custody of key evidence, and the shocking murder of the only suspect all contributed to a climate of deep and abiding distrust. This distrust gave birth to a vast and enduring counter-narrative, a sprawling ecosystem of conspiracy theories that has become a permanent feature of the American political landscape. The list of potential conspirators is long and varied. The Mafia, angered by the Kennedy administration's crackdown on organized crime, anti-Castro Cuban exiles, who felt betrayed by Kennedy after the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, the Soviet Union or Cuba, in a Cold War plot, rogue elements of the CIA, resentful of Kennedy's handling of the Bay of Pigs and his perceived desire to rein in the agency, even Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson himself, in a coup d'etat. Each theory has its proponents, its own set of purported evidence, its own intricate web of connections and coincidences. Over the years, subsequent government investigations, like the House Select Committee on Assassinations in the late 1970s, have only added to the confusion. That committee concluded that President Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, but it was unable to identify the other conspirators. It found the evidence for a second gunman on the grassy knoll to be acoustically compelling, but ultimately inconclusive. The result is a historical event with no universally accepted truth. The assassination has become a kind of national Rorschach test, where the patterns one sees reveal more about one's own beliefs and suspicions than about the event itself. To believe in the lone gunman theory is to accept the power of chaos, the idea that history can be violently derailed by the random act of a single disturbed individual. To believe in a conspiracy is to believe in a hidden order, a secret, malevolent force manipulating events from behind the scenes, a narrative that, while terrifying, is perhaps more comforting than the alternative of pure meaningless chance. But beyond the endless debates and the labyrinth of theories, the enduring legacy of that day in Dallas is one of profound and irretrievable loss. We are left to wonder about the world that might have been. Would a second Kennedy term have seen an earlier withdrawal from Vietnam, avoiding the quagmire that would tear the nation apart? Would his leadership on civil rights have unfolded differently? Would the political polarization and deep-seated cynicism that defined the late 20th century have taken root so strongly? These are the unanswerable questions of history, the ghosts of a future that never was. The final image of the Kennedy era is not the triumph of the motorcade, but the somber, steady glow of the eternal flame at Arlington. It is a symbol not only of remembrance for a fallen leader, but also of the enduring questions that still burn in the American soul. It reminds us that on a sunny day in Dallas, something more than a life was taken. A nation's confidence in itself, in its institutions, and in its own bright future, was shot down in the street. And in the silence that followed the final shot, we were left with a question that echoes to this day, a question that has no simple answer. What really happened, and why does it still matter so much?